Yes, we do have our Zoom. Good evening. Welcome. I'm very excited about this new series that we're starting. So it's really, really amazing to have our regular faces, some new faces. Welcome. Our regular Zoomers, our almost regular. Now you're a regular. That's it. We're expecting you every week. Tonight we are starting our new series, which is the Jewish approach to happiness. This is actually a course that I'm very, very excited about. Largely, the teachings are based on a beautiful book, which is the Hasidic approach to joy, and focuses on many, many sources in Hasidic thought, which is the deeper dimension of Judaism, and many sources throughout Torah, delving into the topic of joy, delving into the discussion of true happiness, and really understanding what the Torah's approach to happiness and the meaning of happiness from a spiritual perspective. So we're going to be going through this course over a series, God willing, of 3 classes. And this is not our summer series. Our summer series will be starting B'ezrat Hashem after this series. And before we start, I just want to once again let everybody know that there is going to be an option of a adult bat mitzvah course. If you are interested in doing it, open to Jewish women who have never celebrated their bat mitzvah and would like to, let me know if that's something that you're interested in. We will be having a second track during the summer, if there's enough of a demand. If not, we'll do it next year during the school year. So the topic that we are starting is all about happiness. So let me ask you all a question. Call out whatever you think, but definitely think about it. What is the benefit of being happy?
Good health.
Good health. Okay. What's the benefit of being happy? Not being miserable. Very good. What else? Spreading that happiness to others. Okay. Ladies on Zoom, you could unmute yourself as well. It's interesting that there used to be, like statistically in universities, they would check to see which topics would be the most sought after classes, like which classes were people most interested in taking. And for a very long time, economy was the #1 class. Everyone was all about business, money. That's where everybody was focused. No matter what degree people had, they were always taking, basics in economy. And recently, there was a study that was done that positive psychology became one of the most attended classes in certain universities. And the topics that were being discussed is psychology of being joyful, of finding positivity. And it was interesting to see that there's this shift taking place where, now let's not think for 1 second that people stop being interested in money, but our world is shifting to the point where being rich is not the be all end all, but rather there's a stronger and larger emphasis being placed on finding emotions and finding joy and purpose and happiness within whatever we're doing. And as we know, everything that happens, whether it's in science, psychology, medicine, everything, it's basically just the world catching up to the Torah. Because Judaism has all of this wisdom and has all of these answers and has all of this depth within the Torah. And lucky for us, we can access all of this information at its source from a godly place, from a spiritual place. And so we see the benefit of joy as something that goes so much deeper than anything that we could imagine. Because of course we all want to be happy. Yeah, of course. I mean, if you ask someone, do you want to be happy? No one's going to say no. What parents want for their children, what people want for their partners, or what people want for their friends is that they should be happy. But what does happiness really mean? What does it truly mean to be happy? And more importantly, how do we get there? What is the magic formula? And what is the route to take in order to achieve that goal? So I want to preface this entire series with a very important message, whether it's for us sitting here, anyone who watches this in the future. This discussion about joy and happiness is definitely not a solution for anyone who's struggling with clinical depression or any medical mental health condition, which makes it impossible for them to achieve that because of some sort of mental illness. And I strongly encourage anyone who needs that to get the help they need so that they are able to apply these tools, because unfortunately they will not be able to apply these tools if they don't have the medical attention and the emotional support that is needed. But here we're discussing in a healthy framework of life. We are complex beings. We are not always one thing. In fact, in even our happiest moments, there is this ability to feel a multitude of feelings at once. So is our goal to always and only feel joy? No. Our goal as human beings, and certainly as Jews, is not to always be in a state of utopia, because that's not sustainable and that's not realistic. But our goal is to be able to find joy and experience inner happiness within every situation and within every emotion. Because if you think about it, we just discussed the wedding, right? Someone could be at the happiest celebration, the most joyful atmosphere, whether it's a wedding or a concert or insert whatever happy place people would be, and you might not be feeling joy. And conversely, someone could be in a very challenging, difficult circumstance, or even a very somber, sad place, and they could be feeling contentedness. So the feeling of joy is really a state of being rather than a circumstance that we find ourselves in. And it's also an action. It's a constant movement that we have to create for ourselves. My brother shared something beautiful with me today. He said, joy is the city in the state of mind. And I love that thought, because really this encompasses what we're going to be discussing. The Hebrew word for joy, for happiness, does anybody know what it is? Simcha. Beautiful. That's right. That's right. Simcha. Okay. Simcha means happiness in Hebrew. And the state of joy is the Hebrew word bisimcha. Bisimcha means that if a person is bisimcha, it means they are joyful. It's like the adverb of happy. It's like it's being joyful. Or the descriptive word for happy is bisimcha. The Hebrew letters in the word bisimcha are bet, sin, mem, chet, and hey. Even if you don't know the Hebrew letters, you'll still appreciate this. If you re-scramble these letters, play a little Wordle game, put the letters in a different order, you find the word machshava. Machshava in Hebrew means thought. Happiness is a feeling that we feel over here, but it really starts up here. Being joyful is a state of mind. It's a matter of perspective. And when we find that joyful perspective, then we're truly able to unleash the power of joy in every situation. Which brings us back to the question we had: what is the benefit of being happy? So Chassidus teaches us that when a person is happy, hello, come on in, have a seat. When a person is happy, they have much more strength, physical and emotional strength. If you think about two people who are playing a game of tug of war or they're wrestling. And if you look at them, they physically have equal strength, same muscle mass, same weight class, everything's exactly the same physically. They are, duking it out in whatever arena it is. But one of them is sad and the other one is happy. The measure of success that the happy individual has is so much greater, and the potential for success and for winning is so much greater because his joy will motivate him not to have more strength, because strength is something you either have or you don't have, but to harness the strength that's within him and use it. Whereas someone who is very down won't be motivated to use his strength in the same way. In fact, it goes even a step further. If two people were fighting and one was physically weaker than the other, but the weaker one was joyful and the stronger one was in a depressive state, the weaker one would win. Because the ability to channel strength would be so much stronger that it would channel strength he didn't even know he had. So we see that joy and being in a positive state of mind is beneficial for so much more than just being happy and spreading joy and being in a good state. It actually helps us be strong. And strength is really what we need to get through each day, because being happy when we're in a good mood is no big deal. Being happy and being positive when things are challenging for us, that's really when we need to call on our inner strength. So when we have the framework of positivity, we're able to gain strength that allows us to overcome challenges and overcome obstacles. Because nobody needs me to tell them that life is challenging. No matter what our circumstances are, and we each have our own completely different set of circumstances, we all have challenges. We all have difficulties that hinder our growth. Hello, welcome, come on in. We all have these moments of difficulty. We have these moments of challenge. And in order to overcome them, what's required, sit down. What's required really is strength. That's really what we need. We need strength. We need courage. We need motivation. And when we approach our challenges from a state of positivity and from a state of joy, we're actually physically able to handle difficulty better, which is a very powerful thing, because nobody is saying that life will be less difficult. Nobody is saying that the challenges won't come our way. What it is saying, it's like, if you think of it, and I'm really not a gamer, but if you think of it in like terms of like a video game, you're still going to have to overcome all those obstacles, but your joy will give you the wings or the extra lives or whatever upgrades will allow you to fly over those obstacles. So the joy actually enables us to be joyful. And that is something that gives us so much motivation to try to find joy, because joy breeds joy. Positivity breeds positivity. Now let me ask you a question. I'm going to tell you a word and I want you to think of, you could tell me the first thing you think, or just give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down based on whether your first thought about this word is something positive or something negative. The word bias. What do you think? Okay, you say negative. What do you think? Negative. Okay. So, Sabina, you're giving me a thumbs down. Okay. Bias seems like a negative word, right? How do you say bias in Spanish? You know what bias is? Anybody know how to say bias in Spanish? Say again? So, Bias is usually, so bias is usually something that's very negative. When someone has a bias, it means that they are viewing someone in a negative light, or they're viewing a situation in a discriminatory fashion, or any negative way of judging people. The truth is that bias is a natural thing. Bias literally at its core means the lens through which you view something. Now, someone who is racist or discriminating or judgmental will view from that lens. But every person at their core has a bias, because your bias is based on your upbringing, your beliefs, and the choices that you made within your life, or the circumstances that you experienced, or the hand that was dealt in your life. And when a person views life and views people and views circumstances, they get to choose what their bias should be. In the world we live in, we view bias as something negative because most people are biased in a negative way. But the Lubavitcher Rebbe teaches that because each one of us have a bias, we can choose to have a positivity bias. That we view everything in the world through the lens of positivity. When I was in seminary is the Jewish college for women post high school. We had a teacher, and she used to tell us something that, I think about it very often. And I was actually shopping yesterday for prizes for my 5th grade students, and I was looking at this wide array of sunglasses, very cute ones. And she would tell us that the way we look at the world is like choosing a pair of glasses. Now, I tried on a bunch of pairs of sunglasses while I was shopping yesterday. There were some really, really dark lenses. There were some brown lenses, black lenses, blue lenses. There were some light pink and purple lenses, which, by the way, those are the ones that I bought for my 5th grade students. And each pair of glasses that I put on changed the view that I had of the store. In fact, not only did it change the view of the store, when I was looking in the mirror, I saw my face in a different color. So when I put on the very dark glasses, the store looked very dark. When I put on the pink and purple ones, well, the whole store, and so did I, we looked very rosy. So the manner in which we choose to view our lives is like putting on a pair of glasses. And we get to choose the lens through which we view everything in our world. We can choose to view everything through a negative light, or we can choose to view everything through a positive light. And whatever lens we choose is the way, not only will we actually see the circumstance, but it will also affect the way we react to the circumstance. Because we cannot choose every situation that comes up in our lives. What we can choose is the way we react to that situation. But it's so difficult to react in a positive way when we're wearing dark sunglasses, because all we see is darkness. So when we view everything through this positive lens, it allows us to react in a way that breeds more positivity, which in turn can either make a situation worse or make a situation better. So we see that happiness doesn't just allow us to deal with negative situations, but it actually allows us to transform negative situations into positive ones based on the way we react to them. Which brings us to 2 very famous personalities in Jewish history. The famous Rabbi Akiva and the famous Rabbi Nachum. Now, both were known for their positive outlook on life. And each one was associated with an expression that he would say constantly. The first is Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva would say, and the Hebrew term that he would use is Kol ma Avid Rachamana Letav Avid, which translates, is actually in Aramaic. And what it means is that Kol ma Avid Rachamana, everything that God does, Letav Avid, he does it for good. Which means that everything that Hashem does, everything that God makes happen is for a good reason. And the story that is told about his life, which illustrates this mantra that he had, is when he was once traveling through a city. And he was traveling with his donkey, and he was looking for lodging. He needed a place to stay, and he entered a certain village, and he knocked on a few people's doors. And, you know, those days, I guess they opened the doors for strangers, and they stayed in strangers' homes. They didn't have stranger danger like we have nowadays. And, you know, they weren't worried, I guess, about, you know, stolen identities or anything like that. You know, he went to all the local inns, and everyone refused to allow him to sleep for the night. And with each door that he knocked on that was slammed in his face, he said, Kol ma David Rachamana Letav Avid. Everything that God does, he does for a reason. It's for the good. And he ended up, it was night, he had nowhere to sleep. So he went into the forest outside the city, and he lay down. And he had with him his donkey. He had a small candle, and he had his Torah scroll. So he was sitting in the forest. His donkey was tied to a tree, and he was learning Torah from his candlelight. It was dark outside. All of a sudden, he hears the roar of a lion. A lion comes and devours his donkey. And what does he say? Kol ma David Rachamana Letav Avid. Everything that God does, he does for the good. Now he doesn't have means of transportation, but he's still sitting and he's learning Torah by candlelight. And there's a big gust of wind, and the candle goes out. Kol ma David Rachamana Letav Avid. Everything that God does is for a good reason. It's dark. He's cold. He's laying in the forest. He goes to sleep. Whatever God does, he does for a good reason. Tomorrow's a new day. He wakes up in the morning. He enters the village by foot, and he sees destruction. The Romans had captured that village in the middle of the night and taken everyone captive. And he realizes that everything that God had done for him had been for the best. Had he been in one of those homes, he would have been taken captive. Had his donkey made noise, they would have heard him. Had they seen his candle, his light, they would have taken him as well. So every single thing that happened that he felt was bad was actually for the good. And that proved this idea to him. And he lived his life by that. Every bad thing that happened, he said, is for a good reason. And there's so much we could learn from that. The second personality in the Torah that we learn a similar lesson to is Rabbi Nachum. Rabbi Nachum was known to say, Gam zu letova. Gam zu letova means this too is good. Every situation that he would say, this is good. And the story is told that he was once sent as a messenger on behalf of the Jewish people to visit the emperor and to bring a gift to the emperor, hoping to curry favor, so the emperor would treat the Jewish people favorably. And he had this very large chest of gold and jewels, and he was traveling to the emperor. He was the ambassador of the Jews with this beautiful gift of wealth to bring to the emperor. And this time, he was welcomed into a little inn or a hotel for the night, and he went to sleep. On his way, And the owner of this hospitality center realized that he had a chest full of jewels. And in the middle of the night, he stole all the jewels and replaced it with sand. And he locked the chest, and Rabbi Nachum took the chest. And as he's traveling, he realizes that there's a difference in the weight. So he opens the chest, and there are no jewels. It's full of sand. What does he say? Gamzu l'tova. This is good. And so he continues on his way to the emperor with this chest full of sand. He comes to the emperor and he tells the emperor, I have a gift for you on behalf of the Jewish people. And he gives the emperor this chest of sand. And in his mind, he's saying, if God made this happen, it is good. The emperor opens this gift. He sees a chest full of sand. He is infuriated, insulted, completely enraged. He throws Rabbi Nachum in jail. The advisor, who our sages tell us was Elijah the prophet, Eliyahu Hanavi, tells him, Emperor, something doesn't add up over here. Why would the Jews send a messenger to insult you when they're trying to get into your good graces? Maybe this is actually a gift. And the emperor says, well, what kind of gift is a chest full of sand? So the advisor says, well, there's a story in the Torah about Avraham Avinu, about Abraham, that he went to fight the kings on behalf of his nephew Lot, to rescue Lot, and he went to fight a war. And the weapons that he had were sand. And when he would throw the sand, it would turn to arrows and it would defeat the enemy. Maybe this is the kind of sand. Maybe they're bringing this, this supernatural, miraculous sand. And so the emperor said, okay, well, we're in the middle of a war. Go take the sand to the soldiers on the front lines and let's see what happens. And so the sand was taken to the soldiers on the front lines. And they're given this order, put down your weapons. The emperor said, throw sand. Well, the soldiers obeyed the emperor and they threw the sand, and every grain of sand transformed into an arrow and they obliterated the enemies. Now, the emperor quickly got Rabbi Nachum out of prison, thanked him for this incredible gift, sent him back to the Jewish people with mountains of jewels and promises of freedom, and with the greatest respect. And Rabbi Nachum wasn't even surprised. He said, of course, everything that God does is good. Now, both of these stories have tremendous value and powerful lessons. But there's actually a very big difference between the two. Rabbi Akiva's mindset was, every bad thing that happens has a good reason. And every difficulty can have a positive outcome. Rabbi Nachum's mindset was, there's no such thing as difficulty. Everything that happens is good, even if it looks bad. Not that it's bad now, but there will be a good outcome, but it is good. So what is the mentality that we should adopt for ourselves? What should we aim to live as our mindset? And which one has the potential for true happiness? So the truth is that we need to combine both. Because we are not only spiritual beings. God created each one of us as physical beings with a spiritual soul within us. And so we have divinity and we have physicality. And our job in this world is to combine the two, to live physical lives with spiritual purpose, and to transform everything physical into something spiritual. And because we live as physical beings, we experience pain. We experience challenge. And when we experience challenge, our goal is not to deny that it exists, because that's not in line with the experience that we're having. And if we just deny challenges that are happening to us, then we can never deal with them and we can never grow stronger because of them. So to live only the way Rabbi Nachum lived on a practical day-to-day, that every bad thing is good, isn't realistic when it comes to dealing with our challenges. So the difference is that we have to think like Rabbi Nachum and act like Rabbi Akiva. Which means that when we are in a challenging situation, when we're going through a difficulty, when there's an obstacle standing in our way, and I can give you hundreds of examples, but I'm sure you can all think of your own, whether it's a challenge with a family member, whether it's an illness, God forbid, or a tragedy, or even something not as extreme, but just a really bad day, or anything and everything in between. Practically, we have to act like something good will come out of it. How do we do that? By looking for the good, by finding the positive thing that we can take from it. But our mindset has to be, God made this happen, and therefore it is good, because God makes everything happen, and everything that God does is inherently good. But God doesn't want it to feel good to us, because if it always felt good to us, we would never grow. We are like pearls. You know how a pearl is formed? Anybody know where a pearl comes from?
Russia.
Yeah. Pearls are inside oysters, or in the shells under the water. And it starts off as a speck of like a foreign object, like a piece of sand. It's basically a nuisance. And the creature wants to get rid of it. So it starts pushing it and pressuring it and trying to get it to move out. And while I'm definitely not a marine biologist or any studies of what goes on under the water, but this I do know. The more friction there is, the larger the pearl. And the more there is a challenge and there is pressure, the more rare and beautiful the pearl is when it is harvested. The same is with a diamond. If you look at a diamond, when it's mined and it's raw, it doesn't look that different than the rocks and pebbles along the road. It's not anything beautiful. Its value is vast, but you wouldn't necessarily know. What makes it shine so brightly? The more pressure is put on it to clean it. How do you clean it? You need heat, you need pressure. It has to really go through, if you think about it in the feelings of the diamond, it has to go through this incredible pain in order to truly shine. And the same is with each one of us. When everything is easy and perfect in our lives, we don't always experience the same growth that we have from overcoming challenges. Now, that's not to say that we ask God for challenges, but it puts the difficulty into perspective when we realize, well, how can I come out of this on the other side? Because you can look at a block in your path as something to stumble and fall, or you can look at it as something to step upon and then become taller. There are so many ways to look at it, but the end result is the same. Challenges have positive outcomes if we focus on what the positive outcome should be, rather than getting stuck within the challenge. But we also can't deny that the challenge exists, or we're not allowing ourselves to truly feel the feelings that we're going through, which is not a healthy thing. Which brings us back to the original point that we made. Our goal is not to always be happy. Our goal is to find joy within every single situation. In the happy moments, to truly feel joyful, and in the difficult moments, to truly feel joyful. which is the literal meaning of what it means to have faith. Do you know that being angry is compared to idol worship? Now, sounds a little extreme because idol worship is one of the cardinal sins in the Torah. It's, top 10 of the 10 commandments is, believe in God, don't serve idols. We believe in one God, and we believe that God is good. That is the basis of Jewish belief. How often do we get angry, though? I mean, you don't have to raise your hand, but how many times have you gotten angry? I want to say just today, right? Like, we all get angry. You don't have to say everything, right? Anger is something that's such a normal feeling, and yet it's compared to idol worship? Really? So why is it compared to idol worship? Well, let's see. Why do people get angry? What made you angry recently? Care to share?
Someone at work.
Okay.
I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a very nice way of saying what probably happened. I like it. I'm going to use that. Okay. A misalignment. Yes. Okay. I like that. Anybody else got angry recently and want to share? Somebody at work had a misalignment. Anybody want to share recently a reason why they got angry? Please. We're a student. Okay. Yes. Let's hear.
The bridge.
Inconsiderate with your time. What did you say?
The bridge today in Norway Village. The bridge. I had to go
Yes.
to the way
The
up
bridge.
125.
Everyone who lives in this area can relate to the fact of the bridge being broken and it just kills a half of your day. Yes. So what happens when a person gets angry? They're having a strong feeling towards something that happened that's making them angry. But if we think about it from on a macro level, being angry at something that happens means you think that something bad happened. But if we really believe that everything that happens comes from God and everything that God does is good, no room for anger, which is something that's so hard to relate to. And yet that's really our goal. And that's why being angry is compared to idol worship. Don't worry, the punishment for anger is not the same as the punishment for idol worship because, God gave us those propensities and we need to work towards that. How does one diminish the feelings of anger to allow for the feelings of joy? Because there's one thing, it's impossible to be angry and be happy at the same time. You can feel sad and happy at the same time. You can't feel angry and happy at the same time because anger is a feeling that is all encompassing. It drowns out every other voice because it's a loud voice. It's possible to have many feelings at once. You can feel scared and feel excited. You can feel joy and feel sadness. You can feel loss and feel growth. There's many things you can feel, but anger is a feeling that has such a loud voice that it drowns out everything else. So one of the ways to achieve happiness is to try to diminish the triggers of anger. Now, that could mean don't be around people who make you angry, but that's not always possible. The idea is to diminish the trigger within ourselves by making the voice that can stop that anger even louder than the voice of the anger, which is to say, yes, this was challenging, but number one, I don't have to let it ruin my feeling. This difficult situation does not have to control me. Also, this situation that happened, it happened because God intended for it to happen. And so there is no use getting angry at that person. I can feel disappointed with that person. I could feel frustrated with that person and voice my frustration, but I don't have to let anger control me. I was actually, reading up about this concept because I always feel like it's so much easier to understand this when it comes to acts of God. Like when someone is going through a tragedy and they're trying to find the silver lining in it, or if there's, a storm or a hurricane or something that feels like it's not in anyone's control. But what if it was actually a person who wronged you, or somebody who was inconsiderate of your time, or was difficult, or was challenging, and the person is the one that caused you the pain? Then how do we respond to that? Because we feel like that person is the one who's at fault. And I was reading this powerful teaching that what happened to you was meant to happen to you. Now, the person who caused that to happen, that's their own business with God. They should not have done it. For example, if someone has a robbery in their home and they feel robbed, they feel violated, they feel like their privacy was completely trampled upon, and they suffered a major loss, whether it's monetary or something of sentimental value, whatever it is, there's a loss when something is stolen. So the person could say, well, it's not God who did it, it's the robber who did it, and the anger should be at the thief. So that's where we need to separate what happened to me and what that person did. What happened to me or you or whoever it is was meant to happen. That person was supposed to incur that loss. As difficult as it may be, God intended for that to happen. That is a challenge that happened to them. Now, God has many messengers. That thief did the wrong thing, and they didn't know that God intended for something to be lost to that person, and said, hey, God, I know that this person's supposed to lose something today. Let me help you out with that. No, that person made a very poor choice, and that's between them and God. But when we believe that everything that happens in this world is because God made it happen, and that God is the one who has a master plan, then it's not our place to punish those who made bad choices. Let's leave that to God. In fact, we learned this from Joseph in the story of the 12 tribes. And, when the brothers committed this terrible act of attempting to kill their brother. And, there's a very large backstory of this. So if you're not familiar with the story, it's a good story to check out. But in a nutshell, Joseph was the beloved child of Jacob. Yaakov had 12 sons from 4 different wives. His beloved wife, his primary wife, was Rachel. She didn't have children for many years, and her firstborn child was Yosef. And when Yosef was born, not only was he born when Yaakov was already at an advanced age, but he was also the firstborn of his beloved wife. And Yaakov paid special attention to Yosef, and the rest of his brothers were quite jealous. And they conspired to kill him. In the end, they didn't kill him. One of the brothers stood up for him and said, why don't we throw him in a pit instead? And the plan was that later on he would take him out of the pit. But in the meantime, there was this caravan of merchants that were passing through, and they said, oh, it's a good idea. Let's just sell him as a slave. And they sold him as a slave. He ended up in Egypt as a slave to one of the Pharaoh's advisors. He ended up being in a very, very uncomfortable and difficult environment through a completely different series of events. He ended up in jail, and he ended up being far from his family, far from his home, far from his father. And his life had so much challenge. His mother had passed away when he was very young, because his mother died in childbirth after his brother was born. And he lived so difficult. His life was so difficult. And so much of it was a result of what his brothers had done to him. And many, many years later, Joseph is the viceroy in Egypt, which, even though that sounds like a great title, and he managed to do wonderful things for Egypt, it was not a position he ever wanted to be in, because he was a very righteous person, and living as viceroy to the Pharaoh in Egypt was a very, very big conflict with his religious beliefs, which were completely opposite to the beliefs of the Egyptians at the time, and it was very challenging for him. And he ends up being the one who is able to sustain his brothers when there's a famine in Israel, and his brothers come down to Egypt looking for food. And he's in charge of the food. And he recognizes his brothers, but his brothers don't recognize him because he was only a teenager when they had sold him. And when he tells them that, he is Yosef, and they beg for forgiveness, and he reconciles with them, and they having a positive relationship. And then Yaakov dies, their father dies, and the brothers are very, very afraid because they think that maybe now Yosef is finally going to take revenge. Now that their father has passed, Yosef is now going to have his way with them because, maybe until now he was only being nice for the sake of keeping the family peace, for the benefit of his father. And they come to him, begging him for forgiveness once again, promising to do whatever they want for him. And you know what he tells them? Hatachat Elokim ani. Am I in place of God? Am I God? What was he saying? The poor choices that you made, if God thinks that you deserve something for that, that's on God to do. I suffered, but it was God's plan that I suffer. Your situation, the fact that you did something terrible, that's between you and God. But I'm not God. And I know that God had a positive plan for this. And he showed them that because of him being in Egypt, the entire nation was saved from famine because he was the one who had the foresight and the divine inspiration to keep, hoarding food for 7 years in advance of the famine, which is how they were able to survive. So he says, I see that there was a godly plan. Now, that doesn't mean he says, you did something good. What he says is, that's God's business. Now, for us to look at people when they wrong us and say, it happened for a good reason, I'm happy they did it, that's too much for us to do. We can't do that because we're human. It would be lovely if we could. And if anyone is able to do that, that's amazing. But that's not the first step. That's a very, very long-term goal to get to being able to look at someone who did something wrong and say, everything was for the best. I'm not going to be upset at you. But the goal to get to is not to allow somebody else's poor choices to affect our state of being. To be able to separate and say, what happened to me by that person was meant to happen. There's a good reason. Gamzu letova. This is good. Something good will come out of it, and I will maintain that positive mindset, while at the same time acknowledging that whatever that person's poor choices were, God will take care of that. Not in a vindictive way, but in a belief-based way of God runs the world, so I don't have to worry about fighting God's battles. Again, that doesn't mean we shouldn't voice our displeasure. We shouldn't ask for change, but it shouldn't come from a place of anger. It should come from a place of peace. Now, that is a very, very hard goal to get to. And tonight's class was all about the building blocks, the mindset. So now that we know that joy is the city in the state of mind, and we know that it's a state of mind that we need to strive for, God willing, in our next class, we're going to focus on how do we move to that city? And what do we do when we don't feel comfortable over there? So these are ideas that we can keep in mind. There are many practical lessons that we're going to go through to apply them in order to make them real and tangible in the moment. Let's remember that number one, joy is felt over here, but it starts over here. So on that note, l'chaim to only having happy occasions. but also to being happy and creating happy occasions. So l'chaim to that. And I look forward to the next 2 classes when we're going to continue this subject. I hope that tonight has left you with enough food for thought to find joy this week. And I am going to challenge you all that next week in our next class, if anybody wants to share a moment where they channeled inner joy and helped make it real. So if you come across it, jot it down or even just post it on the chat. Anyone have any questions? Yes. Anytime this week that you are struggling to find joy and you manage to channel inner joy by focusing on something that we learned, you can post it on the chat, share it with us next week. That's our challenge for the week. And I say our because, you know, this is for all of us together. You wanted to share something? Yes.
I was gonna share it with the child. That's very interesting. It wasn't, all there, so that I did exactly the same process that you just spoke about, the same process. I'm gonna make it angry.
Good for you.
Be like that. Really? I just know where to draw the line and I don't feel bad about it anymore.
Good.
Because I used to feel bad about not being nice to her. Because if I was annoyed, I would talk to her in a nasty way. It wasn't nice. You know, I mean, to the point she would tell me, you know. And I know that it's only with her that I would talk like that to anybody. Anyway, the end result is that my ultimate goal was to get to this class. And I was thinking, oh, how happy I'm gonna see my friends here and have some cookies. And just listen and my goal was to be happy. There anymore. And I said, well, if I don't make it, I'll listen to the. So I had to take everything out of my mind. I had to completely correct. And I actually had a moment. I said, at one point, I had to tell her my thoughts about how she behaved, but not now, but I don't want you to think I'm being not nice.
You know what?
So it just happened like that. And I said to her later, I just want you to know that you can't assume that I have the time of the world. And I said, no. I said, let's stop Miami, I have to go to London and come back to Miami Beach. And it hit her that she was definitely being inconsiderate with my time, and she understood that. I think she learned from it. So that was it. I let it go.
I think that's amazing because what realistically, and I'm going to jump on what you said over there. Your goal was to be happy. And when your goal is to be happy, you're going to focus on that because it's up here. It's up here. That's amazing. That's lovely.
I would have been fuming, but fuming.
Mm-hmm. There we go. Happiness is all in your mind. That's amazing. That's great. Thanks for sharing. Yes, please.
How do you make happiness instead of like not happiness? Like how do you get like the any
Gamzula Tova.
Yeah. How do you make that into like second nature? Like you know what it is, like you know everything is fun, but how do you make it that like you remember how those moments where it's like difficult?
I'm going to answer your question in super short, but it's actually going to be one of the focuses of next week's class. So we're going to delve into more how to practically make it real. But in 2 seconds, make it a habit when things are not challenging. Because when you do it all the time, then it becomes part of your habit. And then you do it even when it's challenging. The same way, you know, if you only exercise and try to lose weight when you have a gown to fit into, it's going to be really hard. But if you have healthy habits as a part of your routine, then you'll be able to maintain it even when you have a specific goal. You understand what I'm saying? Or, you know, like if you're trying to learn a new language. So that's something that, you know, I've been I haven't been practicing my Spanish with anybody here, but if you ask my housekeeper, my Spanish is getting a little better. So at one point, I would only like try Google translating a bunch of things when I needed to learn Spanish when I had somebody in my house. And then I was like, you know what, maybe I should learn a little Spanish every day. And then it was always in my mind. And I realized like, wow, it's becoming second nature that when I need to speak to someone, I know more Spanish words and I'm able to do it more. It's because when you're not only doing it in the crunch time, but rather making it a habit constantly. That's how it becomes second nature. Oh, I will definitely not. Simply because it's going to be just a comedy class. No, but if you guys want a comedy show, I can talk in Spanish. No matter how good my Spanish will be, I'll never know grammar, so I'm not going to be able to do it all. Yes. Please. That is such a good question. That's a really good question. Yes. Yes. And you know what? Remember what we said at the beginning, that the benefit of happiness is strength, right? The downside of that is that when you have strength, you want to use it, right? And when the task that you need the strength for is something that you maybe don't want to do, or the goal that you have seems daunting and seems too difficult, right? So if you're miserable, then you won't have the strength to do it. It's kind of like just being lazy, right? And then you'll feel like you have an excuse not to have to do it. But if you're happy and you're motivated, then you'll feel like you need to do it. And that comes more from a place of fear than a place of being happy, not being happy. Really, I can't make a blanket statement for everyone, but the root of that is more the fear of being happy and what that will lead to. Because many people fear happiness because they also fear success. It's scary to be successful because then there's expectations. And that breeds pressure. But also the fear of being happy shouldn't stop a person from being happy. Because enjoying being sad or being miserable is not long lasting. It doesn't last in a healthy way, which means it's okay to sit with negative feelings for a little while, but to stay in that space is not healthy. And if a person stays in that space, they don't actually stay there. They either go down or they go up, because emotions are not stagnant. It's like riding a bike. If you stop pedaling, you're going to fall backwards. So if you're not trying to become more positive, you're not just going to stay in a comfortable negative space. You're going to become more negative. And I don't mean you, I mean in general, a person would become more negative, which could lead to a very unhealthy place. So it's possible, but it's not healthy. And it's certainly not the Torah way of living, because Ma'alin B'Kodesh is what we say. We grow in holiness. Holiness is something that has to be on an upward trajectory, not on a downward trajectory. 100%. God, just do it anyways. Do it even though you're afraid. And then you'll realize that maybe it's not so scary, or maybe you'll realize that you need a little help. Those are the options. To not do something because you're afraid is crippling. But when you start, you realize maybe you can do it anyways, or maybe you can do it just not alone. And then you find the support that you need to help you. On that note, any other questions we will continue B'ezrat Hashem with next week.